Great. All right. I'll just give it a moment or so. Hello, everybody. My name is Lorenzo. I'm from Green Apple Books in San Francisco. Thank you for joining us tonight for the event with Ananda Lima and celebrating this book, Motherland, collection of new poetry. In conversation or joining us as well, we have some more talented authors, including Ariel Francisco, Nathan McClain, Alison C Rollins. So thank you everyone for being here. So just a couple of announcements before we begin. We have here at Green Apple, we have events all the time, including more over Zoom. So ones that you guys might be interested in, tomorrow we have another virtual event that's Midnight Hour Crime Writers of Color Anthology, which sounds really interesting. That's going to be tomorrow at 6 p.m. here on Zoom, featuring H.C. Chan, Jennifer Chow, Tracy Clark, and more. And then 1 week after that, on Tuesday, November 30th, we're going to be talking with Lydia Davis, promoting her new book, Essays 2, in conversation with Parul Segal. So yeah, both of those sound really exciting. Hope you guys can make it out. And please buy books from us. I am about to drop the link to the book for tonight's event, as well as more books from the other authors here. So you can click these links and purchase directly from us. And that's a great way to support our independent business and support the authors. And you guys get to keep a book out of it, which is awesome. So everyone's encouraged to use the Q&A throughout the event here. You can drop questions in the chat or in the Q&A section for all of the authors to answer towards the end of the event. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first reader of the evening. Ariel Francisco is the author of Under Capitalism. If your head aches, they just yank off your head. A sinking ship is still a ship, and all my hairs are broke. A poet and translator born in the Bronx to Dominican and Guatemalan parents and raised in Miami, his work has been published in the New Yorker, American Poetry Review, Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, the New York City Ballet, Latino Book Review, and elsewhere. He's an assistant professor of poetry at Louisiana State University. And without further ado, enjoy some reading by him. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I've never been to San Francisco, but I'm counting this. All of my digital visits count. So thank you, Ananda, so much for inviting me to read. And thank you to Nathan and Allison as well. It's a real honor to read with y'all. I'm just gonna read a couple poems from the forthcoming book, Under Capitalism. If your head aches, they just yank off your head, which is a quote from the great Salvadorian poet Roque Dalton. And it has a lot to do with my dad and his side of the family. And so I'm only gonna read 4 poems, but they give a kind of, I think, scope of what's going on in the book. And let me apologize ahead of time just for my cat, because he likes to nuzzle against the laptop, and he might move the screen a little bit. So hopefully he's sleeping. This first poem is written after Yusef Kumanyaka. It's called Translating My Dad's Love Poems. It must have been 98, my mom leaving for work, the first night she doesn't kiss my dad goodbye. He closes the door softly, walks slowly to his office, and takes a hammer to the keyboard of his computer as though desperately trying to build something until the letters fly through the air, struggling to form the words he cannot. I watch from my childish quiet, unnoticed, unsure of how much time passes before he labors over the scattered keys, scooping them up with small hesitation like a man collecting seashells and striving to pop them back into place to remember where each one belongs. I am so much like my father, and so I too fear love, how I will inevitably fail it, mishandle it, let it fall from my hands, too fragile to survive intact. Years later, I think of him hunched over that keyboard, the same one he used to write the poems I'm now translating, bent over my own computer, alone in my apartment, his words my inheritance, dim foreshadowing. He writes, "Today I will not think of you. Today I will not think of you. Today I will not think of you." Um, and the second poem, a lot of these poems come out of things that my dad tells me in conversation. He's also a poet, and we get along really well. It's really interesting that like we kind of became friends as adults, though we always got along when I was a kid. Um, in 2019, we both read at a poetry festival in the Dominican Republic, which was really cool. But then he was telling me kind of all these anecdotes. And he told me that his mother, who I never met, she died in the 70s, was also a poet. And I was like, how did you never tell me that before? How's this only coming up now? So it's very interesting to watch these memories return to him like in the moment. So this is about one of those moments. It's called "On Learning My Grandmother Was Also a Poet." My dad says it slowly, as though the memory is arriving word by word in the stale autumn wind. He looks towards the radio tower, prodding the sky like an impatient child. She used to bring me here, he says, eyes on the tower. She used to bring me here with her when she would read. She would read her poems on the radio. He says this as though it's being revealed to him, as though he's learning this for the first time, as though he could have forgotten, as though just realizing this might have affected him. Oh, how I remember my dad at his typewriter, then his word processor, then his computer. How I remember the books lining the walls, the photo of his mother on the shelf. I ask if he still has her poems, and he says no, that they were lost when his sisters cleared out the house after she died, after he moved to the US. His eyes still on the tower. I want to tell him that radio waves never disappear, never truly dissipate, not really. I want to tell him they grow infinitely smaller, infinitely more spread out, infinitely infinite, but still there forever. I want to tell him I am listening. Um, and this is a short poem. This is another one featuring my dad, but also me. A lot of the poems also kind of situate myself as a child or like as a baby and kind of wondering what my dad was thinking in certain moments. Um, and this poem actually started from him misremembering something. My dad, he was always like very politically aware, and he loved Nelson Mandela. And he remembered when Nelson Mandela was kind of, he sort of was like on tour when he was free. He was at Yankee Stadium, and then he gave this big talk at this church. And so my dad kind of conflated some of the memories, but this came out of him recollecting that. This is a short one. This is called "My Dad Watches Nelson Mandela's Visit to Yankee Stadium on TV 1990. Maybe the deluge of cheers from the sold out stadium keeps me from falling asleep. Mandela's voice reverberating through the high-bridge streets. Maybe my dad scoops me up with one arm and with the other takes the Yankees cap from his head and crowns me with it, reassuring me into quietness. The TV's small glow bouncing in his eyes, on his smile, holding me up to its light like a trophy. And this is the last poem. It becomes pretty self-explanatory. It's a little longer, but it's not super long. And this is about one of my uncles. This is for my uncle Kiko, who spent most of his life in psychiatric hospitals with schizophrenia. This is based on, I visited him for the first time in a long time. I think this was 2017. We can't bring in our phones. The armed security says it's to protect the patients from pictures, that they technically can't consent, that it's a real shame we can't take pictures with our loved ones to share with our other loved ones who want to know how our loved ones are doing. He says this with one hand on his gun, eyeing us as we empty our pockets into a locker. No sharp objects, nothing that can record in any capacity for the patient's safety. My dad tells the desk we're here to see Ramon Antonio Enriquez. The first time I hear his real name, my uncle, who I call uncle and not tío because I do not know him. Only ourselves and the food my dad bought at a Dominican spot on the way make it through the heavy metal doors that need to be buzzed open and locked loudly behind us. The visiting area looks like the break room of a large chain store, personalityless, a bland sterility but dirty at the same time. A TV in the corner showing the Yankees lose. The orderlies gathered around the TV watching the Yankees lose. We wait and we wait. My dad says he hasn't seen his brother in a few years, says Kiko has an incredible memory. The mongoose starts to grow cold. Then through the doors, an old man on a walker bent almost in half, moving in slow motion. My dad's brother looks decades older than him. A nurse guides him to our table, and the drugs in his voice ask my dad, "Who are you? Who is he?" It's hard watching my dad explain to his brother. Something is misaligned in Kiko's brain. He remembers his brother Frank, but can't reconcile that knowledge with the person sitting next to him, putting an arm around him, asking if he's eaten today. Who here asks that and actually cares about the response? My dad asks what they feed him here. Oatmeal, he says. And what else? No answer. My dad lays out the food and Kiko shovels it into his toothless mouth, asking if my dad cooked it. My dad asks Kiko what happened to his teeth, wiping his mouth and chin. Kiko answers by nodding towards the orderlies watching TV, habichuelas dripping from his trembling lips onto already stained pants. Again, he asks my dad if he cooked this, and my dad looks over at the orderlies and says nothing. Kiko asks about, and my dad says they died 30 years ago. Kiko asks about, and my dad says they died 20 years ago. Kiko asks about, and my dad says he doesn't remember who that is, looks at me with raised eyebrows and says, "See, my brother has an excellent memory. He remembers more than me." Kiko doesn't smile, just keeps slurping and recollecting his checklist of the dead, unfazed by their absence, by having no landing space for his memories. My dad says Kiko used to keep a notebook of his life, of everything that ever happened to him, and memorized it, kept writing it in his head when the notebook was lost, left in the Dominican Republic on his journey to the States. "Do you remember?" Kiko stops eating and says yes, puts his hands on the table. This is the story of Ramon Antonio Enriquez, born 1951. A pause. He stares wide-eyed as though scared to say what comes next. He starts again. This is the story of Ramon Antonio Enriquez, and then nothing. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. All right, so our next author here that's going to be doing a reading is Nathan McClain. Nathan McClain is the author of Previously Owned and Scale, both from Four-Way Books, a recipient of fellowships from the Frost Place, Sweeney Center's Conference, Red Loaf Writers Conference, and a graduate of Warren Wilson's MFA program for writers. A Cave Canem Fellow, his poems and prose have recently appeared or are forthcoming in Poetry Northwest, Guest House, Green Mountains Review, The Critical Flame, and Zocalo Public Square. He teaches at Hampshire College and serves as poetry editor for the Massachusetts Review. Please welcome him for a reading. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Lorenzo. And once again, big thank you to Ananda for inviting myself to, as well as Ariel and Allison as part of this celebration reading, which is wonderful. it's a real delight to be here with all of you. So really been looking forward to this reading, very much so. I'm just going to read 3 poems this evening, all coming from my forthcoming collection, previously owned, and yeah, and then we'll go from there. This first poem is entitled "The Sentence." The sentence begins with its subject, which is the sentence. Track the sentence to find out what happens or how it will act. It is the subject, after all. To track, meaning keep an eye on, which is synecdoche, part representing the whole of a thing. One may track a package if he pleases. One may track a person, though you'd probably want the whole of him, not only an eye, or perhaps only an eye. Look how the sentence is so capable of embracing contraction. A hymn may function as a subject, but that depends upon the sentence, i.e., a man is subject to his sentence. You understand. Such syntax renders it like a package, showing evidence of having been tampered with. And I'm sure I, like many others, probably have lots of jury decisions on the mind, which is certainly where this comes from. This next poem that I'm going to read is from a sequence that's in the middle of the book, that's entitled, all the poems are entitled "They Said I Was an Alternate," and it really just traverses the time that while I was still living in New York. I served for a couple of weeks on a jury for a attempted murder case that was happening. There was a Black man who was on trial, but I was chosen as an alternate juror, which was a really sort of strange situation where you're there for everything, but when it comes time to deliberate, you are just put somewhere else. So this sequence of poems sort of deals with that. This is just one of them, entitled "They Said I Was an Alternate." They said I was an alternate ending for the end already predestined. No one would argue with the fact of his Blackness, not even me. My pen sharpened the way some pitchforks are sharpened in the parable I don't remember the lesson of, if there was a lesson. If it wasn't just a story without consequence, nothing to walk away with, inherit, or pass down. And then I'm just going to close with a longer poem, and then get out of your way, because I'm looking forward to hearing both Alison and Ananda close this out. This is a poem just that is entitled "What You Call It." And once again, thank my sincerest thanks to Ananda for inviting me, and for for everyone for being here. What You Call It. Not my usual trip to the market, past the railroad tracks, then past Grace Episcopal Church, its courtyard empty. No men clasping hands as though agreeing finally to the difficult terms of some treaty. So I would not have known it was a peach tree unless the person who planted it or someone on the street told me. Which is not to say its fruit didn't look peach-like. It did. Rather, I didn't read it as such, didn't know what I was seeing really. From where I stood, the fruit perfect and young and heavy, at least heavy enough to bow the branches. Ripe, one might say, which, true, is more precise. Precision, a thing of value. Not that the fruit cares what you call it, or stands for anything other than what time can make of some small human intervention, is no piece of literature. The peach was simply a peach, and there for the taking, which is often said of an object that is gone unwatched for too long, susceptible to trespass, which happens first in the mind, and happened first because of fruit, or so says the good book, if you believe in such things. Knowledge, which a poet once called historical, too, a trespassing of sorts, the proof of which perhaps best shown in how one might punish a slave who had been taught to read the word beauty or toil or rest secretly and by firelight. There are things nearly impossible to forget. Having so trespassed, having badly needed to see up close this tree fixed in place, its fruit dangling there within reach, though not the same as being offered. Tenderness, I have learned, is only one test of whether some fruit has truly ripened. You press the flesh right here. But for me, that would mean crossing half the yard, the way a paper boat might be pushed by wind across a pond. Thank you very much.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Nathan. All right, and finally, our next author that we have joining us, Alison C Rollins, born and raised in St. Louis City, is a 2019 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellow. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in American Poetry Review, Iowa Review, New England Review, and the New York Times Magazine, and elsewhere. A Cave Canem and Callaloo Fellow. She is a 2016 recipient of the Poetry Foundation's Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Stragnant Rosenberg Fellowship. In 2018, she was a recipient of Rona Jaffe Writers Award, and in 2020, the winner of the Pushcart Prize. She holds a Master's of Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and has held faculty as well as librarian appointments at various institutions, including the School of Art Institute of Chicago, Colorado College, and Pacific Northwest College of Art. Her debut poetry collection, Library of Small Catastrophes, was a 2021 Hearst Wright Foundation Legacy Award nominee. Thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. Hey, y'all. It's such a pleasure. I echo Nathan and Ariel's sentiments to hear their beauty, their words, their magic, and to celebrate Ananda. I'm just going to geek out for a moment because the diligence and the strength and the truly miraculous magic of putting together a poetry collection and publishing it in these times cannot be discounted or underplayed. And not only that, Ananda's swagger is always on 100. I first met her this past summer at the University of the South, which could be a kind of hostile location in Sewanee, Tennessee, but she's always there with this incredible eye behind the camera lens, both in terms of language and prose and poetry, but also photography with like the dopest eyewear, like always the swaggiest sunglasses or glasses and vintage digs. So she's just an incredible spirit and a really calming presence and energy, and a great contribution being offered again to the literary landscape. So congrats. I think I'm just gonna read 3 poems too, because Nathan made that sound good. And this poem recently came out of, I was in a workshop and we were trying to find ways to talk about our feelings in the midst of the continued pandemic. And so we were using this thing called the Beaufort wind scale, which ranks from number 0 to 12 wind on land and sea in terms of how you would measure kind of the scale of the wind capacity. And one of those rankings included the phrase, many white horses, like the wind kind of looks like the I don't know, the white horses galloping out of the sea, like cliche poster from the 90s that would be in classrooms or something. So this poem is called Many White Horses. To take care of means both caretaking and killing. My mother took care of my grandmother. No, my mother murdered my grandmother, meaning acted as her caretaker until she passed away. My mother was already dead, slain by her mother in her youth. You may wonder then how I came to be. Love, this poem has already taken care of the explanation. Picture me in the form of many white horses, gallivanting, galloping out of the sea. My hairspray, a salted wetness to hold the unruly in place. My ancestors are gone, gone with the wind, fabulous, air filled with critical fabulations, foam, spindrift speaks of unforeseeable conditions. When I think about violence or my progenitors, my memory topples, tumbles. Alrighty. This next piece, I have fond memories of catching the bus from the north side of the south side of Chicago, take like an hour bus ride every morning and reading books along the way. And at this particular time, I was reading Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts. And this piece is inspired by a line in that prose piece. So it's called Parable of the Goldfinch. I think you overestimate the maturity of adults. If a man who thinks he is a king is mad, a king who thinks he is a king is no less so. Heavy is the light head that crowns before the leaves loosen. Beneath the mask of a father is a grapefruit, a boy in fear of his own fingers. From fear's fetus comes the notion of gratitude. We are indebted even before we are born. My occasional chin hairs are masculine plural because our tongues are a violent pink and I cannot speak of blood without trees. Because I never learned how to whistle and I can't seem to kick this body, I have adopted this brittle lake of truth. On one hand sits a song, on the other, my father eats a bird. All right. Okay, one more. I'm gonna do this in honor of my betrothed, the poet Nate Marshall. This is his poem Landless Acknowledgement from his latest collection, Finna. And it's one of those poems that's just really dope and I wish I had written it, but I did not. But it will live on in my voice in this moment. This is called Landless Acknowledgement. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that we live on some unceded bones. Sometimes me and mine imagine ancestral homes. All I got so far is Montgomery, Alabama. What is a homeland for me? Maybe a boat, certainly not a country. Maybe a plot of land somewhere so far from the south sides I've claimed that I would get lost on the way. I admit, sometimes my homies talk about their families immigrating and I get jealous. We lost the land we were custodians over before I was a twinkle in the eye of a twinkle in the eye of a twinkle in the eye. Closest I got to a homeland is my mama's Caucasian pitch in the phone calling the police. Closest I got to a homeland is not never calling the police. Closest I got to a homeland is my daddy's laugh in a spades game. Closest I got to a homeland is my lover's tongue talking or otherwise. Not to be dark, but I am. Not to be dark, but the planet is on fire. Not to be dark, but they move in capitals because the water is coming up. Not to be dark, but our bones are in that water too. Maybe that's my capital. Once the polar capitals melt, and there's a whole lot less land for folks to buy and sell and steal, maybe everybody will feel a little more dark. We'll feel a little more homeland less like we do. Why you think I call my compatriots homies? Maybe ain't no home, except for how your beloveds curse or pray or pronounce. Thank you so much. On to Ananda.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so our final reader of the evening, obviously here celebrating her new book, Motherland. Ananda Lima's poetry collection is the winner of the Hudson Prize. She is also the author of 2 poetry chapbooks, Translation and Amblyphobia. Amblyopia, and a fiction chapbook, Tropicalia, and a poetry and photography chapbook titled Vigil. Her work has appeared in the American Poetry Review, poets.org, Kenyon Review Online, and the Birmingham Poetry Review, Gulf Coast, and elsewhere. She has an MA in Linguistics from UCLA and an MFA in Creative Writing and Fiction from Rutgers University, Newark. Thank you for joining us, and I can't wait to hear you read.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. That was amazing. You're all amazing. You know, when I was putting this together, I was like, let me just ask this like uber talent, amazing people that I love to read and see what happens. And I'm so glad. This is so lovely. Thank you so much. And this reading today too is just lovely. I wanted to, you know, I'm not very fast typing, but I wanted to say, oh my gosh, so many things. Yes. And yeah, so I'll read a little bit. And oh yeah, Nathan, I forgot to say in the pre-show chat, I was in LA and I was going to go to the observatory, and they're closed. But the first thing that, and I wasn't even thinking of anything, but the first thing that I thought when I like drove into the entrance was your poem. You know, it was just so lovely. I was like, oh, how lovely that this came back to me now. Anyways, there's more things for each of you, but I'll start reading. I will read this short poem to start, and I changed it up a little bit based on your readings. Let me find it, wherever it is. There you go. So this one, it's written in this form called American Sentence, which is just Americanized haiku, right? So yeah, so I thought that was interesting. And then there's a poem called 37 Haiku by Ashbery, but this one's just 7. 7 American sentences. In the beginning were people who lived here before. In the beginning of spring, spirits hovering over the waters. The vault, evening, morning, sky, the second day after a shooting. Body, let it serve as a sign to mark times and days and years. Correction, George Washington's teeth were never made of wood. In the beginning of the end, missing signal for lane change. And on the seventh day, same thing again, only some rested. All right, so that was 7 American sentences. And I love your sentence poem so much, so beautiful. um, all right, I will read this this poem that is very much um, sums up a lot of the things that are talked about in the collection. So it touches a lot of the things. It's a good intro poem. And now I moved my thing. Okay, there you go. And it's called Line. Line. I inherited from my mother the knobbly joints and square ends of my fingers. From my father, I got the habit of biting my nails. Their shortness, the frayed missing skin, had never bothered me. But now I have a son, and he has begun to bite too. In America, I learned that I can snap a rubber band against my wrist each time my hand reaches up toward the mouth. On the back of my hand, the rubber band disappears into the color of my skin, but when I turn and face the inner side, it is a clear division of my body. The first time I saw a cotton tree, I found it beautiful. The cotton, so white in its brown cradle, so soft against the square tips of my fingers. I squeezed the dead flower around it and felt joy from hearing it crackle. As children, we had cups full of sugar cane. We chewed on it and spit out the bagasse. Toothless men ran the knobbly stalks through a machine. The juice trickled into our glasses, and the flat piece that came out on the other side was put through it again until everything was gone. The dried, split stalk thrown into a pile, limp like blonde hair. When I first arrived in America, I didn't understand what people meant when they said with an American accent that they were Irish or Italian or French. Now that I understand, I asked my mother for a family tree. She said she had never thought of such things, and she wouldn't know much past her grandmother's first name. So what I have is my memory of the faces of my relatives and my own. When I first arrived in America, all I could see was beauty. The snow, fine like sugar, white like cotton, but now the beauty, the land, the tired metaphors just make me sad. Before I left for America, I saw an individual in the mirror, but today I see my father, my mother, my brothers, my son, and a man missing skin from tears on his back, and the man who did it. When I looked this morning, I tugged on my rubber band so hard that it broke. All right. Okay, so I'm going to read a sort of like sister poem to this one in my head. I don't know for other people, but for me, they're the same poem written differently. I like reading them together. And it's called Arroyo. And one background thing for it is I was at a party, and as you're doing parties, I was, we were talking about the letter A, and the letter A is like after, came from the drawing of a head of a cow or something like that. So I was walking home, and then I was thinking of, the big tragedy in my where the area where my family comes from is drought. So there's always drought, and the symbol is always like like a head of a cow on the dry crack soil. And then I was thinking of my name with the three heads like staring at me. So that's when I wrote this thing. It's very freaky. All right, Arroyo. They say the first letter of my name evolved from a picture of a carcass. A cabeça de vaca sem as suas costelas expostas like claws or jaws, ancient. My neighbor says not to let my son sleep on my bed, but I do. I know the terror. At night, we're haunted by my great, great, great grandparents, dry on cracked soil, beating in the cold of my feet, na bahia in the bones they inhabit on my bed. In America, I learned that our arroyos are paths carved by the rain, but I already knew. At night, the cracked soil calls for me, as cabeças de vaca of my greats, calling and calling. I tell them, I don't know you, but I do. The city spine is a split bifurcation solidified in calcium. In America, they eat the bagasse of oranges and say my name means bliss. I am in love with bone white concrete. The spine of the city sits fleshless and free of scales, flexible bones that can bend and keep bending and keep bending and bending right up until they snap. Right. And now I'll read one more poem and I'll finish with that one. Let me see. And this one, it was a phrase that is in this poem. That's why I'll read it. That wasn't Nathan's reading. All right. And this poem is not just about what it is, but also about being in a targeted group and having privilege within that group. And navigating that situation. But I wrote it when the ice raids were more visible for a little bit. And there were lots of rumors everywhere. And then there was rumor, and there's some real things, and there was some that were just rumors. And this one is when there was a rumor that they were going the 7 train, which is my train at the time. When they come for us on the 7 train, past the underground tracks, the railroad rises. Our eyes adjust to the sun over Jackson Heights. At the platform, the doors slide open and the winter comes in with the men in their dark uniforms. Silence, except for the please, stand clear of the closing doors. The weight of their boots sways the car, and I raise my hand towards the pole. But one of the men grabs my wrist, and I feel the cold of his black gloves against the grooves of my tendons. The cold crosses my skin. The cold mixes with my blood. The cold travels in my veins to my fingertips, to my elbow, and my other hand lets go of my son before the cold reaches him too. I say, I'm an American citizen. The soft tissue in my mouth cracks with frost. I say it louder. I'm an American citizen. And the frozen edges of the words scratch as they move through my throat. I shout, I'm an American citizen. And reflected on the men's visor, I see my face. I think of my son if they take me. I think of my son if they don't, as he watches me whisper, I'm an American citizen, while the others are taken by the men of ICE. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ananda. That was beautiful. Okay, so
Thank you all so much.
yeah, and thank you everyone else for reading as well. At this point, we open up the event for questions from the any participants. If anyone has questions for any of the authors today, you can drop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions and discuss. So yeah, I encourage anyone.
All right, if nobody has a question, I have a very curiosity, and also because I want to get those books. I think pretty much all of you have something either just came out or coming out very soon, or both. Can you tell me a little bit of that so that we kind of know what's going on? So recent or about to come out books.
Yeah, I guess I could I can start with that. The book that I'm currently in the process of finishing up revisions on, and it'll be out in fall of next year, is which is the poems that I read from tonight are coming from that book. Really very excited about it. It's kind of like as a follow-up, certainly to Scale book, which I really love. And yeah, so looking forward to it, but also like incredibly terrified of it as well, because I had always sort of told myself, and I was adamant that I would not write overtly political poems, though like what poems aren't political, right? But I was like, I'm not gonna write overtly political poems, and largely because I felt like as a Black poet that was sort of what was expected of me. It was expected of me to be angry. It was expected of me to be, unruly, to have all of these issues with injustice and all these things, and why shouldn't I? But I mean, how can we, living in the society and the country in which we live, like really avoid that sort of thing entering into it and filtered into just our experience in our writing? So a lot of the book is really dealing with criminal justice system and thinking about sort of like this reclamation of the pastoral and things of that nature. But so much of what you've also talked about, Ananda. So yeah, excited for it to come out, and thank you for the opportunity to read from it tonight.
I have the poems I was reading from are from a forthcoming book. In the spring, Under Capitalism, if your head aches, they just yank off your head. And it has a lot to do with my dad. It has a lot to do with the Dominican Republic and sort of Latin America as well. And that's I pulled the title from Roque Dalton, but it also plays with the idea because the idea of Yankee comes up a lot because it's like a semi-derogatory term in Latin America for an American, right? YANQUI. And I also have a chapbook that's just coming out. I think it just came out, actually. It should be out this month with a small press called Glass Poetry. And it's called Every Morning Now I Wake Up with a Mouthful of Blood. So I'm a big fan of long titles, but that's what I got going on. And then I have, next summer, I'm really excited. I translated a book from a young Guatemalan poet, and that's coming out next summer with, I always mispronounce her name, but it's Spooten Deville. It's a small press based in Brooklyn, and that's called Routines Goodbyes, and that's I'm really excited about. That's gonna be really cool. Yeah, that's what I got going on.
I don't know when my next project's coming out, so might be supposed to.
But yours came out it came out during the pandemic, right? Or no? Or just before?
Just
before.
The blessing,
yeah.
the anointing of the ongoing.
Which is
pandemic.
like,
yeah, spring
yeah, it's like,
2019.
No. Yeah. So I feel like, I want to celebrate it now too. Wonderful.
I can pose a question, Ananda, I'm curious about just seeing you in action with your photography, like how you think about image on the page versus image like behind the lens, or the photographs that you produce, or maybe you see them as in conversation with each other, or like language as a translation of the actual visual image, but maybe how like those practices communicate with each other.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. You've seen me in it's as if poets write, I don't know, freelance articles or whatever. So it's funny because I'm doing like an event, it's like totally different mode. It's like quick, I'm just getting everything, very fun, but very different. When I'm doing like my own photograph, I sit, I take one photo and I take the same photo like 1,000 times. So it's very different. But it's so fun to have somebody here who's seen me work as a photographer. It's a real thing. But I think I was like, people knew, or I was even out to myself as a photographer first. And I write fiction, and I think the poetry for me feels much closer to the photography, even maybe more than the fiction. And I I think I had a very intuitive understanding of that, but now because of talking about things, I think I'm starting to verbalize it better. But I think that the poetry um, takes there's so much nonverbal in poetry, right? And in the case of a poet like me, it's on the page, like line breaks and spaces and all this stuff. So nonverbal things are harder to paraphrase, I think. Even though good stories resist paraphrase, right? Like that's true for fiction, but I think it's much harder to explain a photograph and to explain a poem and have that explanation be close to the actual thing. um, it's there's a lot going on that is not just the words. Um, so I feel like there's this similar thing going on, and also even to myself, being able to say the thing in the poem, even if I can't verbalize all about it. That's okay, because that's the point. That's why I'm using this medium. So I think there's a lot in common for me. To the sensibility is similar, and this nonverbal component is very present and important. Yeah, I love that question.
And I would say definitely, Ananda, one of the things that if that I was hearing, especially in the poems that you read tonight, was their engagement not only with place, but also, I mean, thinking about that 7 train, and and certainly thinking about other locations that are within the poems, but also this idea of time, or and in particular lineage. And I mean, obviously your son comes up a lot in some of in the work, but also just ancestry in general. And so I'm curious as to how you think about, and particularly how you thought about it for this book. I mean, the book is entitled Motherland, right? I mean, it's incorporating both of those things, this idea of lineage and place. And so, yeah, I wonder how you thought about that as you were not only drafting these poems, but also putting together this collection, and and sort of like what that sort of means for you just as a writer.
It's such a wonderful question. So yeah, so I think this was my first collection. So in the very beginning, I didn't really know it was a collection. It took a while for me to understand it was a thing. But the poems I was writing were very much at this intersection of immigration and motherhood, because I had been out of Brazil for a while. But it really changed my experience of migration, and I think connected to all the things you mentioned, like land and lineage. So before I lived here, I lived in Australia for a little bit, and travel around, and I was like, okay, I'm here, and I was here like permanently, but I was kind of a little bit more removed. Um, I felt like belonging is a complicated word, right? But in certain ways, uh, there's many ways that I still don't belong. But there's a way that I didn't feel I belonged, that I then sort of became more a part of what's going on here. And I feel like the history, even though there's so many commonalities, right, and back, there's a lot of things that Brazil and America have in common. But I felt with my son, I was like, oh, no, he is a part of history here, just like many people who were not originally here, and therefore I am too. Therefore, all this history is also my history. So there was a lot of going back with the history of this land, and also thinking of things that I was not even that concerned. I mean, I'm concerned with them, but it wasn't as central to my mind as when I had my kid. I was like, oh, he's not gonna know this. Like all these things that I took for granted started being re-examined. So I was thinking a lot about this intersection and how one experience changed the other. And so when I saw this, that's what I was doing anyway. So when I saw that was what was happening, I could think of the poems as exploring all the different questions that come up. And because I wanted to talk about all these things together, you know, which is a lot of things and it connects to so many things. And that's where like that non-verbal of poetry, you know, I didn't want to, I think people write beautiful essays, but I'm not good at them. And I thought there was just too many things to talk about. And poetry gives this space to connect with things that are not said there, and for the poems to talk to each other without me having to actually like verbally link them. So I think it ended up being very wonderful that I got to have all of these things in one object, you know. Thank you. That's so great, everybody. Thank you so much. This is like a dream because I love all your work and like they're just beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm very excited for all this to come from all of you.
All right. So is that all the questions and everything? Okay. Well,
Did you see there was a comment about the Green Apple Books website?
oh yes. Yeah, someone named Kristen was having problems with it, but said that it ended up working out. So that's
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. Good.
Yeah, thanks for purchasing from these awesome authors. Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you Ananda, Allison, Nathan, and Ariel. Really so great to hear from you all. Really amazing work that you're doing. I'd love to have you guys back here someday. Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again,
Thank
Ananda.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Allison and Ariel. This is awesome.
This was
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Have a
And thank you, Lorenzo. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Of course.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks
Have a
to all
wonderful
the
night.
viewers.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks
Bye.
so
Have
much.
a good night, everyone.
Have a great night.